Welcome, this is Black Lotus, your YouTube script kiddie, and this is how to convert different sheets within an Excel workbook into separate CSV files. So I have a workbook that was a combination of two Makaru sets. They both have the same headers and the same type of information. And the idea is to go through each one of these sheets and to convert each one to a CSV file. So in order to do this, I'll first need to import a few modules, mostly CSV, and then the second one I will import is called OpenPyXL, and this can be downloaded using conda install OpenPyXL. To start things off, I'll define a function, XLS to CSV, and I'll give it two arguments. One is a file path, and the other is a CSV name. I'll declare a variable called workbook, or WB for short, and it'll be called using openpyxl.loadWorkbook, and I'll pass it file path. Now what I want to do is loop through each sheet within the workbook. So I'll say for sheet in wb.sheetNames. And wb.sheetNames simply produces a list of strings. So sheet will be a string in this case. I'll set up a context manager for the CSV. And since each sheet has a different name, I can't simply pass a CSV name. But what I can do is pass in CSV name and then right afterwards sheet. And again, since sheet is a string, I can get if it's any casing I want. In this case, I'll give it title casing. I'll open it in write mode and I'll give it an alias CSV file. I'll set up a writer. And for the following set of code, it's important to note there are a few things that are tricky about Excel files. Mainly, they are not zero-based. They start at 1, so everything that will include a range will need to be at least incremented by 1. And since sheet is simply a string, we have no way to reference the workbook or the worksheet within the workbook at this time, so we'll need to set that up. So we'll first set up the reference to the individual sheets, and we'll call that XLS sheet, and we'll set it equal to WB bracket sheet. And now we'll set up our max row and max column for our ranges that we'll have to loop through. So to do that, we'll say max row is equal to XLS sheet dot max row plus 1. And again, we're doing this because Excel starts with 1 instead of 0. And we'll set up the max call to XLS sheet dot max call, or max column plus 1. We'll generate our headers. And to do this, we'll take the first row of the sheet, go through each cell, generating a value up until the maximum column. And once again, this generator here is simply saying take each cell in the first row of the sheet, get the value for it, and each of the following cells up until the max column. And we'll write that to our CSV file. And finally, we want to loop through the rest of the rows, getting the values for each cell in those rows, and then writing those rows to the CSV file. So for R in range 2 to max row, again we are starting at 2 because the first row has the headers and the data starts at row 2 up until the max row. XLS row is equal to XLS sheet dot cell. So again, we're going through each cell in a row. Up until the maximum column and grabbing the value. And writing that to the CSV file. Okay, so we'll separate the function from the rest of the module. And I'm going to set up the body of the main the same way I did for the XLL and JSON conversions. I use sys and I use pathlet. Set up my try block. I'll define or create my first variable called file path equals sys.argv and CSV name equals sys.argv2. If one of these parameters is not given within the terminal, it will throw an index error. And if an index error is raised, we'll simply exit early. And if an exception is not raised, we'll first check to see whether or not the file actually exists. If the Excel file is actually a file within the system, we'll invoke XLS2CSV, give it the XLS file and the CSV name. And if it doesn't exist, we'll once again specify that we want to exit our program. Okay, let's give it a go. I have an environment already set up with OpenPyXL installed, so I'll go ahead and activate it. And we'll specify Python 3, xls2csv.py. We'll give it our file path. And we'll call this one test from xlsx.csv and let it run. Sheet names. Okay, it ran and it seemed to work. And it appears that I made a slight mistake in the naming convention. I put the test from xlsx.csv down here. To avoid that, we can actually put in .csv up here. And I'll just go ahead and write it again. That's more like it. Okay, so we'll just delete these. And we'll go ahead and check it. So we see that test from xlsx data.csv and then test from xlsx data2.csv. We have our headers. The first one we have Janine Seeley, and the last record will be from Pierce Crumby. And data 2, Simone DeLacy, and the last record would be Eden Lorenzen. I don't know how to pronounce that. in the original XLSX file, the first sheet has Janine Seeley. The last record in the first sheet is Pierce Crumby. And then in data 2, first one is Simone DeLacy. And the last record will be Eden Lorenzen. So that worked. These are the two CSV files, and here is the code that converts each sheet within the workbook to its own CSV file. Thanks for watching, and I hope you got something out of it.